Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with Mark Desouza. Mark is an amazing magician, an incredible creator, and a fantastic collector. Mark is collecting and connected to amazing magicians around the globe, and he is one of those links between the old school of magic, the magicians who we only hear of in books, people died before many of us were born, and the new school of magic. And Mark has one foot in either. He is a gem in the world of magic. He is such a good friend, and this was a phenomenal and interesting episode. If you need help selecting material, if you need help collecting material because you're a collector, or if you just want to have some fun, you're going to love this episode, and you're going to love Mark. So here it is, a wonderful episode with a good friend of mine and soon to be yours, the one and only Mark Desouza. Mark Desouza. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jonah. How are you doing today?
I am doing excellent. This is such a privilege to hop on and chat with you because we've had a couple opportunities to hang out in person. We had a couple opportunities. You were on our unconventional.fun lineup, and I don't know what happens, but it keeps being in the air that it goes, you know who knows that guy? Mark Desouza. You know who's good friends with that guy? Mark Desouza. You know who? So I want to unpack and maybe figure out that maybe in 30 years or however old you are, I will be the most connected person in the world like Mark Desouza, So one day, basically what I'm trying to say is when I grow up, I want to be Mark Desouza.
Oh, man. Well, you're going to have to move down here and, take over a company that I run.
Oh, no.
Then you will have hardly any time to do magic. So,
Okay, well, then I take it back.
Yeah.
Take it back.
Yeah.
I'll just be one of Mark Desouza's kids. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm so excited to have you. How have you been? How are things?
Things are good. As I alluded to, magic's not my full-time business. I run a fairly sizable real estate development and management company, and it's more than a full-time job, but I still manage to, play Magic Boy every once in a while. And, I've got two kids. One is, graduating high school this year, and he's off to University of Pittsburgh next year. And I still have one more at home, and I've got all kinds of, familial responsibilities. My wife likes to see me at home and, all that.
Before we get back to the beginning of how you got into magic, I'm curious about the last couple of years. I think the pandemic changed a lot for everybody. And more than, now we're sort of quote unquote out of the pandemic, whatever that means, but we're maybe on the other side of it. But I think people's habits have changed, on the other side of this thing. And I'd love to know, what has magic sort of been looking like for you recently? The last 6 months, 12 months, has it been different than it used to be? What's it been like?
Well, absolutely. The pandemic had a tremendous impact in a number of ways. First of all, in real business, it had something of an impact, at least for the first 3 or 4 months. But then after that, it actually increased my business huge. Big time, because we build and own apartment communities, and my vacancies are, below 1% and have been consistently for the last 2 years. So that's all great. Single family homes we construct for sale, and my gosh, until about a month ago, it was just gangbusters. Now it's slowed down, and I think the interest rate creep, as well as supply chain issues that have increased costs of building, have helped to slow that down. But we're still selling houses. So now nobody needs to know that. The part they need to know is magic wise. The beginning of this pandemic, I've got a 33-seat theater in our home. And I regularly sponsor lectures by the best magicians from all over the world who come and, given the opportunity to lecture wherever they want in Philadelphia, the majority of them choose to lecture at my house, even though the capacity is less than other venues. They'd rather lecture at my place because of the people that attend the lecture are far more serious about their magic, and they buy stuff. That's always good for the lecture. But with the advent of the pandemic, obviously, we had to shut that all down. And at this point, I don't have specific plans to reopen. My wife is immune compromised, and we're very, very concerned. She is also a physician. So, her take on the pandemic is, well, things have, loosened up some, but we're not out of this yet. And to a great degree, I believe, yes, it's loosened up, and yes, people are getting a little more complacent, but I think we're on a roller coaster. We're going to see ups and downs. I think we're going to see mask mandates come and go. I think we're going to have to, be a little more vigilant than we are by just saying, oh, it's done. It's not. And so, if I open up to do the lectures again, that I'm hoping can happen sometime in the fall. But again, it's going to be, I am going to be requiring people to be vaccinated and masked and just, play nice, as it were. But that also means that I've got a lot of cleanup to do downstairs, because in the last 2 years, a lot of stuff has been accumulating all over the place, and I haven't had a reason to clean up. My theater, I turned into a video studio. And, I started off like everybody did with one of these little cameras we use on our laptops or on our computer. And, I soon learned that that's not adequate. And I was fortunate to get schooled by a bunch of people, and I invested many thousands of dollars in 3 really good cameras and a full sound system and lighting. I've got, a 7-point lighting system. I mean, I went overboard for what I do, but I figured if I'm going to do it, I want to do it as well as I can. So, I've been doing video, I've been doing Zoom lectures all over the world. I've been doing performances, both for magicians and for laymen. Not a huge amount, but it's enough to keep my hand in it and enable me to have a desire to develop material that was appropriate for that.
I think it's incredible because the way you talk about magic is like, somebody who likes to play guitar on the side, but they run their business and they do everything, but they still play guitar and they play in shows and different things like that, a lot on the side, but they've got a business that runs fully and does its own thing. And it's just so interesting the way that you're talking about, magic as, this amazing hobby that involved a theater, that involved putting on shows, that involved, and now it's different. Now you're going to be producing videos and lectures and, in theaters, in your home, because the pandemic sort of evolved the way that you do magic. A lot of the way that we do things have changed. I've been doing so much virtual performing and that's not going away either. So very, very interesting to hear. Why don't we go all the way back to the very, very beginning? How did you get started in magic even?
When I was 5.5 years old, I went to a friend's birthday party and there was a magician performing there. That's the first real recollection I have of seeing magic. I remember being really interested and captivated in what he did. And I only remember 2 tricks that he did. One was a handkerchief that was thumbtacked to a wooden frame, put in an envelope, and a knife is plunged through that. Well, that's great magic for kids. Anytime you can use a knife. And the other thing was the egg bag, which is, a central piece in my own shows today. From there, Mark Wilson started his show nationally called The Magic Land of Alakazam. I watched that every Saturday morning. And I recall seeing a magician on the Ed Sullivan Show, which I've traced back and realized was Ricciardi. So that's pretty good. So that started my interest. I started bugging my parents and grandparents for, magic tricks and magic sets, which they would get at the toy store, and started, playing with that stuff and performing for the kids in the neighborhood or, at my cousin's birthday party or whatever. And I guess I was probably 8 or 9 when I ventured into my first magic shop, which wasn't actually a magic shop. It was a magic counter in a bookshop downtown. And that became my magic shop for another couple of years. And then when I was 10, I wandered into Cantor's Magic Shop, which was owned and operated by Lee and Terry Gray. And Lee kind of became a mentor to me eventually. And that's where I started getting my stuff and started doing kid shows. And but I always had my eye, because I was constantly watching, Ed Sullivan every Sunday night, and he would have on these great magic acts. And, most of them were the quote unquote silent act those music-based acts that you see from either America or from Europe, and that really influenced me. I've seen Channing Pollock. That influenced me. When I was about 10 years old, I saw Cardini's last performance in New York, and that influenced me. So I really loved stage manipulation. That was really what I loved. That's kind of where a lot of focus was for a while, but I realized that wasn't something you could do as a show for laymen. When they book you, they're booking, a 30 or 45-minute show.
There's two turning points that I'm super interested in this part of the journey. The first is the turning point of when you realize that the way that there's magic out in the world is not just through a book in a library or a little trick in a shop, but you also meet the magic community and you go to maybe a convention or something like that. And you now are one of the most connected magicians ever. So when was the moment where you were like, oh, wait, this isn't a counter at a bookstore kind of thing. There's actually dozens or hundreds of people in my city. What was that moment for you?
The Canners was a wonderful gathering place for magicians. And on a Saturday afternoon, you'd have a bunch of the local guys just hanging there for hours, and they'd go out to lunch and, so, it didn't take long before they realized that I was not the typical kid interested in magic. I took things a lot more seriously and I wasn't going away. So they figured, they better start helping me out. And, all these guys took me by the hand and showed me stuff and shared information and watched me and critiqued what I was doing.
Who specifically comes to mind?
Oh my God. Guys like George Hampel, Harry Reid, who actually ran the counter at Ben's bookstore and then worked in another shop later that I eventually worked at. Dick Gustafson. Of course, Lee Gray, who owned and ran Cantor's Magic Shop. Oh my gosh, John Moran, Mitch Voron. I mean, all these guys, most of them are guys you don't know. But I will tell you, guys like Harry Reid. Harry taught Teller how to do the beans from the eyes. Harry was, connected with the sideshow community. He knew all this carny stuff. And he was more than willing to share that information with somebody who seriously was interested.
So let me ask, I'm sure it's different now, but I know you and I got off to talking about this a couple of weeks ago. But what is it that a young magician should be doing or needs to be doing so that when they go to that community, people are willing to share with them? People are willing to, the actual experts and pros are willing to take them under their wing. What did you do right, or what can people do right?
Back in the old days, I don't want to sound like the old codger, but back in the old days, when I got interested in magic, there was a handful of what we called the Cantor kids. There were 5 or 6 kids who hung out at Cantor's, and each of them had like a different approach or a different interest or a different role. And so one of them was the kid who worked behind the counter with Lee. Another one was the guy who he was a little older than us, and he started getting bookings for adult shows more because he looked older than he was, and he presented himself as someone a little older, a little more sophisticated. So those were the gigs he was getting, and he was getting some good coverage in the press. Me, I don't want to call it a move monkey, but I was an information junkie. I read everything that I could get my hands on. And I not only read it, I studied it. And when I asked questions, they knew that I had already done my research. I had already done more than just, what's a double lip? No, I knew, I learned 4 different double lips. Well, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And I had guys like Ed Voorhees. Oh my God. Ed was this amazing treasure trove of information. Ed was close friends with a lot of top underground guys like Eddie Fector, like Frank Thompson. And so, they would show me things that were shown to them in confidence because I was deemed worthy, if you want to call it that. But eventually, then they started inviting me to these sessions with these guys. And again, I'd be asking good questions. I wasn't just information for information's sake. I wanted this information so that I could put it into action and use it to further what I was doing. So I think, anybody who wants to gain entry, into either that portion of the community or specifically with specific individuals, don't just say, oh, show me a trick. You say, okay, I've been working on this. I understand you've got a lot of experience with this. Can you point me in a direction where I can, take this further or make this better? And I have never, ever seen a situation where either a working performer or somebody who is, legendary status would not share. I've been amazed. I mean, you say connected. I've been very lucky. I've made it a point to learn about magicians that are off the radar. I've done research. I make it a point to be somewhere where I can meet up with X, Y, or Z and develop a relationship with them. You need to take the time and you need to make the effort to do all of that, to do it. I mean, if you want to be in that position. And I've been thoroughly amazed at the number of people that I consider to be the top, the best, absolutely the best, who have been willing to share things with me that don't get shared with other people that are, they're sub rosa.
It seems like the answer is to put in the work. Like, it seems like the way to get people to give you more info, the secret work, to give you the time, to give you et cetera, is to put in the work. I think that's the only way,
And that stems from desire. Curiosity is not desire.
That's interesting.
Curiosity, you can go on the internet and you can find some general information. Look, anybody can find the secret to pretty much anything, within half an hour on the internet. You just got to know where to go and follow the path. Desire is a whole different story. Desire is you need to put in the work and you need to make the effort to find the people, not just the information, but find the people who are knowledgeable and or experts.
We were talking about it like a couple of weeks ago, but here's the way that I put it, which I think is so interesting, is the difference between I want to talk to you versus I want to talk to you about blank. It's such a big difference when you're when you're seeking a mentor, like whether a literal mentor or someone to help you, to just say, hey, you're really awesome, I love your work. It's like a great, thank you. But to say, here, really awesome, I love your work, and now specific question about it, specific comment, thought, opinion, that actually shows that you're chatting with them not to be in the presence of someone, but to get actual information or feedback or whatever.
Absolutely. And, I've always been willing to spend as much time with somebody who is genuinely interested and has a desire or need for certain information that they're not going to find on the internet, that they're not going to find, in the average book, that you've got to really delve into it. And if I've got experience with it, hey, I'm more than happy to share that. And most of the people I know do.
So we were talking about a couple different phases in the journey of getting into magic. So the first is, I think, there's that moment when you find magic, then there's the moment where you find magicians. But then there's the moment where you sort of decide what role magic is going to play in your life, whether you're going to be someone who just reads it, who does it on the side, who performs, who different things like that. And obviously you've taken in as a lot of different ways to interact with magic. But one thing that strikes me as interesting is it seems like you have put quite a bit of effort into some of the material that you work on and the stuff that you like being practical, being workers, being, stuff that really actually makes sense out in the real world for real people. And I know it's not necessarily, it's not your job, but I think it's important. I think it's important that we fall in love with stuff that we can actually do for actual people, and it actually has a result. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Well, let me preface this all by saying that when I'm in magic mode, and when I say magic mode, performance mode, I still approach it as any professional would. When I'm dealing with clients, I don't talk about my real job unless they happen to know about it already. I'm a magician. So I'm competing with my friends who are full-time pros in Philadelphia area. I'm not going to undercut them. I'm going to be competing against them for the work, and I want to compete on the same level. So everything I do is the way a professional would approach it. So that kind of is the encompassing thinking behind what I do. So yeah, practicality. Look, I have two sides to my magic person. One is historian collector. I've got a lot of crap. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff. The props I have, I love. I collect them for historical purposes. I collect them because I love them. I collect them because of the personal connection with magicians. A lot of different reasons. There's a lot of stuff there. That's not stuff I use. I rarely trot that stuff out. I mean, the only time, I trot that out is I have a history presentation I do, which I'll be doing at FISM this summer. And yeah, there's a couple of historical pieces that'll come out of my collection and be carted up to Quebec City. But other than that, that's not the material I generally work with. So the material that I work with has to be appropriate for my performance style and persona, and it has to be practical, and it has to be, easily moved, easily set up, pack. I'm not going to say pack small, but pack reasonably, plays big. And I have a variety of different types of material that I do within my show. And so it's not just the props. It's not just the table or the case or the lighting or the music it's the whole package. You have to consider, what do you need to put together to best perform this properly for your audiences? So I have to consider all of that before I choose a piece to go into my show. And there's a piece of advice that I got as far as creating material from Alan Shaxson, who was one of the great stand-up performers from the UK. I admired greatly. I thought Alan was one of the best performers I've ever seen. Classy, commercial. I mean, he worked the best spots. And Alan said to me, when I research a piece of material that I'm considering doing, I find every version I can. I read every version of a book. I buy every commercially released version, and I analyze them all, and I take the best points out of each of them, get rid of the worst points, combine the best points together to create the best version for me, for my presentational style, for my skill set, for my conditions under which I work. And I have constantly kept that, central in my thinking. I do a lot of research about a lot of different kinds of magic. And, I never stop working on stuff. I'm always working on material, but the material I work on has to be practical. Does that mean I'm afraid to carry a portfolio that holds a board that I need for a particular? No. If I need something more, yeah, I get it. And I work it and see if it works for me. If it does work for me, great. If it doesn't, goes back in the closet. Maybe gets trotted out once a year, once every 2 years. There's stuff I buy I'll never use. But I love it. I love it.
Let's talk a little bit about choosing material. I remember when I started doing stand-up performing, there was this trend that I saw happening to a lot of close-up performers. So you'd be a close-up performer, you decide to start performing on stage, you do some card tricks on stage, realize they don't play very well, and they end up doing mentalism. And there's actually a lot of people that went on that little journey, that end up doing mentalism on stage from close-up card magic. I don't know what it is. I think it's because we don't relate to these giant objects. And I remember that point in my magic, and I said, I don't really want to do mentalism. And as kind of dumb as this sounds, I set out on a goal to do magic with stuff. I needed stuff. I needed things, whether it was a cups and balls routine or a balloon or a box, or I needed stuff. I needed things to help fill the space and fill the stage and be interesting and not just be a board and a marker and a deck of cards, which end up being boring sometimes. And that led me continuously on many roads in many ways led me to the classics over and over and over again. It kept leading me back to the classics. So I'd love to hear you chat a little bit about this because, again, as dumb as it sounds, I see a lot of your magic and you do great magic with stuff. You know, obviously there's cards, obviously there's coins, but a lot of these things are actual stuff, props, items, and that sort of rings with the classics. I'd love to hear you talk a bit about this.
Before I talk about the classics, let me make two statements. Number one, mentalism, the balloon animals of the new millennium. All of a sudden, you know, in 2000 or slightly before, everybody decided they're going to hop on the mentalism bandwagon. And they do that because the mentalists get paid better, have to carry less. You know, it's horrible. I mean, it's terrible. I have seen more guys doing mentalism who have absolutely no business doing mentalism. Mentalism is all about presentation, and a lot of these guys can't present their way out of a paper bag. I will mention no names, but I mean, I see guys that it's appalling. I started doing mentalism over 40 years ago. 45 years ago, I started doing mentalism. My oldest friend in the world is Mark Salem. Mark and I have known each other since we were 6 years old. And when he was coming up, and I'm talking again over 45 years ago, 45, 50 years ago, you know, I would work with Mark on his stuff. I would work with him. And eventually, you know, I was the consultant on his first off-Broadway show. And, you know, we've always had a great working relationship, but I always was careful not to tread on his territory. It's difficult for a young man to do mentalism. It really is. And depending on how you present it, I remember I started doing mentalism in my shows when I was 20. And I discovered pretty quickly I should not be doing mentalism. I'm just not ready for this. At least the way I was presenting it was a way that brought people backstage. Tell me, is my grandmother going to die? Can you help find my lost cat? And, you know, these are questions you don't want to answer. Eventually, you know, I was able to formulate a manner of presenting mentalism where those questions don't come up. I don't get those questions. And I mix mentalism and magic. Okay, so let's put that aside. Classics. Classics are classics for a reason. You know, classic means it's been performed for hundreds of years. Why? Because it's great magic. It's the plot lines are simple. They're easy for people to grasp and understand. And there's lots of room for interpolation, meaning lots of space for you to create your own version of all of these. So you look at any classic, and there's hundreds, if not thousands of people performing these things. Many of the best are distinctive. They're different. They're bringing something of themselves to that piece that's different than anybody else.
What are some of the, maybe not forgotten, but what are some of the classics that, you know, don't get as much love as you think should, that really check a lot of these boxes, especially now that I think people are, more and more magicians are having to perform in this parlor-esque setting, like it's becoming more popular again, and more magicians are having to, like I said, figure out interesting magic with interesting objects that other people are not doing. You know, and it's sometimes it's hard to check all those boxes. I'd love to know if there's anything that comes to mind.
You know, there's nothing specifically that comes to mind, but I can tell you that a lot of what makes great classic magic better is changing the props. So, you know, you look, you know, for instance, Teller, his Miser's Dream, ending with the goldfish, that's a whole lot different. That's a whole different trick there. Oh my gosh. You know, there's a difference between a standard cups and balls and a Tommy Wonder cups and balls, or a Williamson, or Gertner. I mean, these are all different takes on it. Those are all kind of standard, still using the cups, but now you got a guy, Adam Wilber, the coffee cups. Okay, so coffee cups have been used before. You know, Vernon used coffee cups, Molina used coffee cups. But what Adam did with this is logical and really good. Yeah, it starts off standard, but all the coffee cups are gimmicked to allow you to do certain things that you can't do with ordinary coffee cups. But then he's got these incredible loads at the end. Is it practical? Not for all purposes, but you find yourself in situations where you could do this trick and make this work. So there's a great example. Linking rings. I mean, that was the trick that I made my bones with when I was 17 years old. And that was due to Ken Brook, another guy who I consider a mentor. I said to Ken, Ken said to me when I was 17, do you want a trick nobody else is doing? I said, yeah. He said, linking rings. I said, I hate linking rings. He said, let me show you something. He came out with these huge rings. I mean, they're like this big. And he does one move for me. I said, I'll take them. And he said, I didn't tell you how much they were. I said, I didn't ask. And that's the trick that I became known to magicians for in my mid to late teens and continue to use in my act every show. Great classic. And I'm using rings. For a period of time, I used heart-shaped rings in a romance themed act, which Tommy Wonder hated. Tommy and I were friends for over 35 years. Tommy said, I hate those because you know exactly where the opening is. With a ring, you don't know. I said, yeah, point well taken. And I switched back to the rings, the regular rings. But you look at a Mike Caveney, who does it with linking coat hangers. You look at a Mark Kalin, who early on did a pool shark act. He did it with triangles, the racks, the racks. So yeah, there's space for these classics. I can tell you from my own experience and in my own repertoire, better than half the material I use in my stand-up show for laymen is classic stuff. I mean, Bill and Lemon, great trick. And it's the opening and closing to my act. I open my show with a chop cut routine. There's a good rationale in the scripting for that. I produce a lemon, I put it in a bag, I hand it to the guy in the audience. We'll get back to that later. And then I borrow the bill and bill disappears. We'll get back to that later. I complete my entire show. And I'm ready to walk off stage when the guy in the audience goes, hey, shakes the bag. And I go, oh, I forgot. And then we produce the signed bill out of the lemon that he's been holding the whole show.
I want to change pace a bit and talk about your magic collection. You have a magic collection that is talked about for miles, all the way here in Canada, people talk about your magic collection. And I'm not a huge collector, but I have been more and more, nearby the world of collecting. I obviously live with Ben, who is a collector, like crazy. And we've been searching and learning a little bit more about magic collecting. And obviously a couple months ago, we had the chance to go on the Copperfield Museum tour, which was fantastic. And the question that, boils inside of me, or at least did at the tour or afterwards, is, not just why, obviously there's a little bit of a reason, to have some of this stuff, but the question is like, to what end? And what I mean is, how do you decide, okay, that I actually don't need, that I need in my, how do you make those decisions? So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, collecting, and specifically collecting in magic. There's not a lot of people that do it, and how you personally decide, how you curate what is in your collection. What do you say, I need more of those? What don't you need, and why?
Let me tell you a story. I never considered myself a collector. I was probably 30 years old before I realized I was a collector. And the first public magic auction was at Swan Galleries in New York. It was the Neil C. collection. And I went up ahead of time and I looked over the stuff to see what I wanted to bid on. And there were things that I bid on. And there were various points where there were noted collectors and historians there. I'm not going to name names. But one of them turned around, and because there was obviously one individual from Europe who was buying up most of the books at ridiculous prices, just crazy. And this one individual says, this guy's got no effing idea of what he's buying. He obviously just has an unlimited supply of money. He's just buying. As it turns out, later I found out who it was. And the guy, yes, had a lot of money, and he did have a want and desire to, really tune up his collection. And so he did know what he was getting. He was just paying ridiculous prices for it. But I saw the prices at that auction. And I said, I'm not going to be a collector. That's crazy. I can't afford this. And over the years, I just kept buying stuff. But
over the years, you got a real job, and then
well, I had a real job at the time, but I'm certainly not as well paid as I am now. But what I decided I wanted to collect was whatever I was interested in. I didn't buy just for the sake of collecting. I didn't buy a piece just because it might have great value at some point in the future. No, I bought things that I truly had an interest in. Unfortunately, I have a real interest in a lot of phases of Magic. So there's, certain manufacturers that I like. That's not a focus of mine, but there's certain people that if their pieces come up, I have a desire to own those. Most of the props are performance-based stuff that, they're different variations on a theme, like die boxes. I probably have 40 different die boxes. Well, one of the reasons is it's a trick I do on my act. I actually use the die box, and it's a great trick. It's a great classic that has been overlooked by so many people. Now, I have a historical presentation about it, and in my history show, I do it, but I do that same presentation in my regular show when it's appropriate. Chinese sticks. I've probably got 50 sets of Chinese sticks. I love the Chinese sticks because that was one of Fred Capps' great tricks, and I love Fred Capps, and I do Capps' routine, and I own Capps' sticks.
When you stumble upon a pair of sticks, like obviously you don't buy every random pair of sticks you find. How do you, or maybe you do, how do you decide, this is another set of sticks that I'd love to add to my collection? You have 50. Like, so is there someone, is it like Pokemon cards? Like there's a magician whose sticks, you got to catch them all, or are you just wait until something inspires you? Like, how do you know when you want something?
I've got to look, if I look at the sticks and go, that's a good looking set, or, I find out some more information, works well, or the methodology is a little different. Like you look at a Kavari stick, the ultimate sticks, that's something real different. And there's a lot of oddball type sticks that you've never heard of, but I know about them. I want them. So if it's something that's different and something that either appeals to me just for its existence or appeals to me as potentially that could be a prop I could be using. I own Capps' sticks. Do I use them in my regular shows? No. One of the best operating sticks I've ever seen. They're beautiful, but I don't use them in my regular show. I use them in the history show. Not my regular show. My regular show, the sticks I use are Ming Dynasty sticks that were made by Art Khan, who had a company called Xanadu. And I buy those up when they're reasonably priced because they're real bamboo. They operate really nicely. They're of a decent size. And it's just, they operate well. But the damn strings keep breaking them. And I'm terrible about having to sit down and repair these damn things. So I have 8 sets of them. So when the last stick goes, then I repair them. But that's kind of what, and when you're talking about Chinese sticks, well, now you have to talk about how you finish. What's your finish on it? And there's the Benson solution of the third stick, which Capps adapted without ever knowing it was Benson's until it was too late. That's a great solution. But there's other solutions out there. Guys like Ali Bongo, Terry Seabrook came up with great solutions, similar yet different. So you got to decide what works best for you.
Do you have any favorite items or books or pieces in your collection that, nobody can see anywhere else or can't find anywhere else, or ones that have a big spot in your heart?
Well, obviously the Capps stuff that I own, I've got a bunch of Fred's equipment. Recently, there's three pieces of Capps that I perform pretty constantly on performances is the Chinese sticks. I have a version of his homing card, which was based on the Hugard Browie. I learned Capps' version, but then realized that, it didn't play as well for me, and I created a thoroughly different storyline. But his jumbo coin manipulation and diminishing bills. The diminishing bills I have his original set. I have made up duplicates because I don't want to use his set and destroy the collectability of that. But this is something I used in my manipulation act when I was in competition, but I use it in my regular act. That's often a middle piece. Sometimes, depending on the show, I use it as an opener. and it's compact and really plays well. And I had the good fortune to use Caps's actual props in performance when I did my history presentation for the New England Magic collectors, because it was at Ray Goulet's theater, and that's part of Ray Goulet's museum, and Ray Goulet owned Fred Caps's chess. And I jokingly suggested that I use it, and he said, "Oh, yeah, you should definitely do that." I said, "Ray, I'm kidding." He says, No, I think you should do it." So I came in the afternoon, I practiced with it, and I used it that night. And when it came up to auction, I knew exactly what it was. I knew the condition of it. I knew. I also knew who I was bidding against, and so I got to visit that chest a few weeks ago in Las Vegas, which is in David's collection. And I asked specifically. I said, "David, where's the chest?" He says, "Oh, wait a minute, it's over here somewhere." "Oh yeah, it's back there." It wasn't even out on display. I mean, it was behind something else. So I said, "I just want to check something because I have a duplicate chest." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." Scott Penrose, who was the president of the Magic Circle for many years, Scott's an amazing craftsman, and he contacted me a few years ago and said he wanted to do Caps's act for one of the Magic Circle history programs. And he knew that I had done the routine. So we spent a lot of time talking about it. So he said, "I'm going to make a duplicate chest." I said, "Well, let me know when you're done and you can make a second one." Unfortunately, Scott had an injury and is no longer able to do the routine. And so I'm now the possessor of that chest. And it is a duplicate of Caps's chest. So I'm going to start using that instead of the chest I had made, because it's a lot nicer. But that's a prize piece, along with Caps's candelabra, the Chinese sticks, a bunch of close-up stuff. I think as far as props are concerned, that's probably the stuff that I prize most. I mean, there's more recent stuff like I bought the Blaney cage, the Walter Blaney vanishing cage, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing that I want to start using. I just acquired a Martin Spirit Lock, which again is a piece that I want to be doing at FISM. So there's a lot of props that I love. As far as books, my library, I really consider more of a research library than a collector's library. But, I do have some pieces that are, reasonably collectible, signed T. Nelson Downs, Modern Coin Magic, signed John Ramsey book. I mean, stuff like that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing collection. And I think what you just said about the books resonates with me, at least. I find it very hard to own books for the sake of owning them. Most of them, they're for the sake of actually having them to read and use.
I agree, but I will say that I buy books in every genre of magic. I don't do children's shows. I've got a whole section of kid show stuff. I'll do illusions now and then. I'll do an illusion now and then. I own a few, but I have a whole section on illusions. I want to read everything because I think there is knowledge that spills over from one genre to another that you may not even consider until the point where that piece of knowledge all of a sudden it clicks in your head. Oh, wait, I remember reading this. It could be a principle used in illusion that you apply to a close-up trick. It's amazing how much crossover there can be. And the history of magic, I mean, my gosh, it's not just reading great stories. A lot of it is trying to analyze what made great magicians great. What made their material so distinctive, whether you consider it, in today or in that period of time. What is it about them that made them great? And, and hopefully not make the same mistakes they made along the way.
Speaking of different genres of magic, we obviously have FISM coming up soon. And it is, for many of us who don't travel very far for magic competitions, maybe one of the first FISMs it's definitely the first FISM I've ever attended. It may very well be the first FISM that I ever attend. I don't know. But I know that you have a huge history with competing and winning in magic competitions. And I'm sure this the excitement of FISM coming has brought a lot more people into the competitive Magic space, at least because it's coming here to North America. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your advice for anybody who is starting to compete. It's obviously a little bit different than performing for lay people and performing out in the real world. Like, it's a different universe. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the Magic competition universe and any advice you have for people who are getting into it.
Sure. Well, first of all, concerning FISM, if you haven't already qualified,
it's too late.
Too late.
Yeah, no, it's too late.
But if you're thinking about FISM being your first competition, guess again, that ain't happening. Even on the national level, I don't suggest people compete at a national convention first time out. Go first and see what the competition is like. Competition at a local or regional level, that's a whole different story. You want to jump in there and compete, hey, this may be a great opportunity for you. Before you get involved with competing on a national or international level, make certain you understand what the expectations are for competition at that level and approach it with a realistic approach. Don't look at this and go, oh, yeah, I could win that competition. Or, be honest with yourself. Be really brutally honest with yourself. I've seen guys really embarrass themselves that had no business competing at these things. But now most of the nationals and internationals require pre-vetting. There needs to be, an application video, and they'll make that determination. I think the most important thing is, why are you competing? What are you hoping to get out of this? If you're competing to win the competition, I think you've got that all wrong. If you think winning a competition is going to assure you of work or is going to increase your prices or this or that, that doesn't happen anymore. Most lay people are thoroughly just clueless about what Magic competition is. Wasn't always that way. If you won FISM Grand Prix, you were literally guaranteed work for 10 years. That doesn't exist anymore. Those venues don't exist anymore. And that's the biggest thing. For the guys that are competing in stage and stage manipulation in particular, that genre has become really tough.
But that one still has a little bit of, like, if you win FISM on stage, like for stage manipulation, like, those people tend to be pretty busy afterwards.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Because where can you do that act? Where can you do that? Other than a Magic convention, where are you going to work? There is a handful, maybe two handfuls of places you can do that act. Look, is there any place in Las Vegas you can do it? Hey, maybe there's one review show that'll still use a magician.
You have to be part of an ensemble act where you're the magician doing 15 minutes and you just do your manipulation.
Right,
act.
But that's rare to see in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Anywhere else in America, you don't see it. It doesn't exist. You may have some, Magic theater type things or, productions like you guys do with Toronto Magic Company, where you'll put one of those acts on the show, but that's not a way you're going to make a living.
The other place I see it is in like touring shows, like, The Illusionists and things like that.
Correct. And how many of those are there?
Right. There's 3, 4, 5, like.
Correct. And other than that, you're looking at a handful of theaters, variety theaters in Europe that would book an act like that. In Asia, there's maybe a handful. I mean, maybe worldwide, there's 25 places where you can work and 200 of these Korean guys.
So why compete now? Like, it seems like a better way to do all this is to try to go get on America's Got Talent or Fool Us or something. Like, why compete now?
I think you compete because, well, for a number of different reasons. Number one, you get seen. Number two, you get noticed and you get reaction and you get critique. People see you in competition and they'll seek you out and say, boy, that was a good act. I've got an idea you might want to consider. And the best part of competitions to me has always been the sessions with the judges afterwards. SAM always does this. I don't think IBM does. But you have the opportunity to sit with the judges and get and get their viewpoints, get their critiques, get their suggestions. And some of that stuff has been invaluable. I've been on both sides. I've been judged and I have been a judge. And that's a great reason to compete, is to get this kind of critical input.
High level feedback,
Exactly.
High level feedback. It's hard to get that in a lot of places, especially, Magic clubs is a really good example where if you're not in the competition setting, then it's a lot of people often blowing smoke up each other, saying that they're all good, when you need to actually be ranked and get notes and get feedback from somebody where it matters.
Exactly.
And that's a
and
good
then you've got to listen, and then you've got to filter later. Don't filter while they're talking, just absorb it all and then decide what you think is of value and what you think is not, and make your critique that way. That's a great reason to compete. But again, you get seen. And so if you want to work Magic conventions, that's a great way to get seen, to get booked. You're not going to make money from it, but it's a great scene to get booked and go to conventions for free.
I have a few more questions left to ask before we wrap this. One of them that I think has been a thread through a lot of this is a lot of the connections that you have to a lot of magicians. You seem to know everybody. Everybody seems to know you. Why is that? Or maybe more specifically, why do people like you, Mark? Okay. No.
Because I'm a likable guy.
But I mean, not every magician is in that situation. Not every magician is super connected, some people are connected. Some people maybe keep to themselves. Some people wish that they were more connected, but they're not. What is it? Is it the hospitality of your hosting of lectures that's put you in contact with these people? Is it the fact that you've just been working hard at Magic, so they just want to actually jam with you and spend some time with you? Like, if somebody wants to be super connected in Magic, have all of these friends that can help with we always, when we work on our Magic, we want friends, we want advice, we want mentors, we want, this amazing community. So what are some of the secrets to building that, community of people around you?
I think you have to put yourself out there. You need to, establish an identity for yourself in the Magic community to begin with. And that identity has to be one of sharing, of, just generally being friendly, of being approachable, being a guy that, seeks out these connections. I look for these people and I begin talking to these people, and I talk to them in a manner like we were talking before. It's not just like, hey, I think you're great. No, it's, I think you're great, and here's why I think you're great, and here's stuff that I do, and I think, there's an overlap with the way you think and the way I think. So a lot of it is that, for some of it in the early days, back in the 70s, early 70s, mid 70s, there weren't a lot of guys doing stand-up manipulation in the States. And so when the Europeans would come over, they'd see that I was one of the guys, and they'd want to sit and talk and jam. So guys like Herr Copper and Tommy Wonder and Jan Terrell. And I saw Jeffrey Buckingham when I was like 16. And, Buckingham was a FISM winner in the 50s. I said, I have a great interest in this, and, I want more information on this. And even later, it's like guys like Bob White from Texas. I traveled 6.5 hours each way to the Buffalo 52 convention just because Bob White was going to be there. And because my buddy Eric DeCamp said, you need to meet Bob White. You need to see Bob White. So I did that. And during the lecture, he's talking about all this wonderful close-up stuff. And then he does the egg bag. And I just start asking question about the egg bag. He just stops after 3 questions, said, it's obvious you're looking for something that nobody else here is. Let's talk afterwards. And we literally spent the whole weekend together, and he gave me all the work because he knew, I wanted it, and he knew I did it. He
knew you weren't going to stop asking. That's what he knew for sure.
Yeah. So when you talk about the hospitality, though, booking the lectures came after establishing relationships. It's tough to book some of these guys unless you already have the relationship. So my relationships doubled or tripled after I started doing that. But I already had a big core of guys who said, yeah, we'll come lecture at your house instead of going to the local IBM or SAM, because I know it's going to be a more fun experience. I know it's going to be a better experience.
I think caring, putting yourself in to be a part of the community, it makes a big difference. And the other one is it's very easy to give respect to this art, and I think when magicians and mentors see you giving respect to the art in different ways, that's one of the biggest keys to building relationships, is seeing someone else who treats this the way that you want it to be treated. And sometimes that's the biggest barrier to why somebody is not in the in crowd, is because they don't treat magic right yet. They don't get how it needs to be treated. And I find that magicians congregate with other magicians who treat magic with the same level of respect as they do,
I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. You need to be like-minded, at least in the level of appreciation and love for the art, and desire to further the art, beyond your own personal needs.
This podcast has been interesting over the years, because I've had a chance to interview obviously tons of magicians and learn about different generations of magicians. And you are one of the few that I get a chance to interview that is part of this middle generation, where you get all the goods of these magicians who are, gurus, and who, we've only ever dreamed of being able to actually spend time with. And you spent time with them in their prime, and you've been a part of the whole new movement as well, and you've seen all of that. So I have a broad question and a specific question. I'll start with the broad question is, what do you really feel has changed in the way that magic is done from the pros 30 years ago or 40 years ago? These names, like Vernon and Tommy Wonder and Johnny Thompson, and, what has changed between those Fred Capps, those magicians, and the magicians now that are really succeeding or really crushing it or really getting the respect of the magic community? What's changed?
I think a lot of it is venue based. The venues that a lot of these old guys had just don't exist anymore. A lot of them were what we call nightclub or review magicians, like Johnny and Capps and North Nielsen and those sorts of guys. That sort of doesn't exist anymore, or in a very minor way, which we've already talked about that. But now there is a whole different set of venues that magicians have to work in, like the magic theaters that are cropping up all over the country and in Europe and in Asia for that matter. That's a whole different, you could literally set up a tour of these magic theaters for 6 months, 8 months, whatever. That's a whole new thing. And then, of course, the big one is the internet. There's guys, they're just killing it on the internet. And, pardon me, it's YouTube stuff, other channel stuff, social media stuff that to me was always, a way to build brand and to promote yourself for live shows. But they're a genre unto itself. I mean, you can monetize these things. I mean, that's not my thing. I know nothing about it. I don't post stuff on YouTube. People post my stuff on YouTube, which I'm always amazed at, sometimes illegally. But
well, so funny enough, I said there was a broad thing and a specific thing I wanted to talk about. So the broad thing was talking about what's different with magic, and I think you nailed it. The venues are different and the internet's different. The specific thing I wanted to talk about is that there's a lot of pieces of magic, moves, techniques, tricks, that with the invention, the popularity of the internet, have become things that people know, but they don't know where it came from. They just know it. They just know that what it is because of the internet. And one of those things, I think, and there's a great example, the story, is the move that you invented, which is shapeshifter. That is something that you see every beginner magician doing, they start learning a double lift, they start learning a color change, they don't shapeshifter. Boom. Where they learned it, who knows? Who could have any idea where they learned it? But I promise it was very not likely from your publication of it, you know?
That's correct.
So I would love to hear, you know, what you think about this, because there's something obviously fueling and exciting. That something that you invented has quite a bit of like ubiquity in magic, and it's like a go-to color change, so much so that it almost has, there's tricks that almost transcend people being worried about their like revealing, their exposing. Like Salt Shaker Through Table is a good example. Like enough people know it in the universe that a magician won't get angry if you teach it to someone, because like everybody knows it, or not everybody, but there's a little bit of ubiquity. And I think Shapeshifter now kind of has that. Like people know it. There's I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying it, you know, I think it might be true. So I'd love to know your take on it.
So we'll focus on Shapeshifter specifically. Yes. And because it's a good example of what's going on here. And let me begin by saying I did not create Shapeshifter in a vacuum. This came out of something that terrific Texas magician, Oscar Munoz, who's a Gold Cups winner, he showed me after a lecture when we were sitting at Denny's eating. His handling the move is thoroughly different, but the basis of it came from Oscar, and I developed. This
was like up here at eye level.
Yeah, it was a vertical move as opposed to, you know, a close-up move, and it was difficult getting in and out. Mine is, you know, just it's very organic. It just comes and goes in a normal handling position. Be that as it may, I mean, you know, I would say 95% of the people who do Shapeshifter are doing my handling, not Oscar's, but. I published it. Steve Beam asked for it for Trapdoor magazine. I gave it to him happily. It was on the cover. I insisted that he put Oscar's version right next to it. And Oscar was very pleased about getting that kind of notoriety. He never had anything like that at that point. And then suddenly it started getting around, usually with neither my or Oscar's name attached to it, until the point where it appeared on a couple of video projects of other magicians that I found out about, and one called it the Beam Change, assuming it was Steve Beam's, and you know, another one, you know, gave no credit at all. And you know, I contacted them and say, hey, you know, this was published. Oh, we didn't see it. Somebody showed it to me. It's like, that's the way moves get around. So that's why I think it's really important that the lineage be properly documented, that there be a history of these things. Not that I'm going to make money off of it. It's just, it's only proper that you credit these things. So I was asked by Illusionist. Brad contacted me and said he wanted to use Shapeshifter for a PSA he was doing on Gamblers Anonymous. Sure, go ahead. Then he contacted me and said, we'd like to put this out, you know, but do you have some extra stuff we can put with it? I mean, sure. And he was going to do it just as a download. And he was contributing to the Theory and Art of Magic program, which my friend Larry Haas was running at Muhlenberg College. And I was very involved with that program. I said, if you're contributing to that, you take any of the money you make and you give it to Larry's program. You give it to Theory and Art. And that was the deal. Then he said, well, I want to put it out as a DVD. I said, okay, now it's a different story. Let's talk about it. And we came to an agreement. It was very reasonable. And he put it out there. And that was all fine. But then guys just started lifting it and putting it on their own personal social media projects on you know, YouTube or whatever, Instagram.
Do you mean performing it or teaching it?
Teaching it. I had no you know, I've published it. You could perform it. I have no problem with that. Don't teach it, and particularly don't teach it without any credit to me. And there are some noted people who we've talked about privately, I'm not going to bring it up here, who have done just that, who have put it up there without asking me, without any credit to me. Somebody else took credit for it. And that upsets me. Now, here's my take. I'm not a pro. I'm not depending on this for my livelihood. And so I made the decision that anybody who asks me if they can use Shapeshifter in their trick, or if they can use it on their video, I've never turned anybody down. But everybody who puts it up there without asking, I try to get them to take it down. That's not right. It's just not right. So at least ask. Be nice enough to ask. I'm a nice guy. I'm going to let you do it. But you got to ask. Just don't take.
Yeah. You know what? First of all, I agree. I mean, I think that you don't want to teach stuff without getting permission. But I also think that in the changing of the generations and the internet and all that, a couple of pieces get caught in the crosshairs. And I think this is an example of something that gets caught in the crosshairs that is hard to solve. Because I think it's obvious when you shouldn't teach someone's whole trick. Like I think that's obvious. Someone who's selling a trick, you shouldn't teach their whole trick. I think that's obvious. But it's hard when you're jamming with a friend and you learn a cool move and the friend doesn't necessarily tell you what it is. Or worse, this is a really interesting point, is you may just see someone doing the move and say, hey, let me give that a shot. And you figure out how to do it, right?
I have no problem with anybody doing that.
But I'm saying that's part of the reason why these things spread without crediting. And there are some moves that are so natural that, the invention of them, now that it's here in the world, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't forget it. You can't, it's just natural. It exists. So I think part of it is the ease and the naturalness of the move that makes it so easy to multiply everywhere.
I think part of the problem also is that the current generation, I'll just refer to that as a blanket statement, believes that information should be shared freely. I don't agree. I mean, that's part of the ethics of every organization, is that, you don't expose magic. If you're teaching magic, it has to be at a cost, so to speak. And what does that cost? Is it buying a book? Is it buying a download? That can vary. Some people will say the cost is going to the library and getting a book. That's a cost for certain things, but it has to be at a certain level. You're not going to get Shapeshifter going to your public library. So consequently, I don't think that should be taught. I think there's public domain stuff, like you said, salt shaker through the table. I think that's generally referred to as public domain. There's guys I knew who are hardliners who say, no, you shouldn't teach that. There's pros using that in their act. I think there's a level where something is public domain that's been published for 50 years in the public domain, and, should be fair game. But there's stuff that's, specialized material that you're not going to find in a book written for the public, and shouldn't just be shared out there on the internet, easily found by half a dozen guys, with no crediting and no information, and no compensation, obviously. But at the very least, give the credit so the lineage continues.
That's the part that the transition, I think, from the old generation to the new generation of magic that we need to solve very well is building that lineage, and things like Conjuring Archive, and things like that are really helping make that possible. And it's still hard as hell. And it's not happening the way that it needs to be happening, because you can't chase content that fast.
It's not only that, it's trying to get these magicians to change their mindset and have more respect for magic and magicians and the creations that came before them, and not just pluck them and teach them willy-nilly because it's going to get them more views. That's not right. It's not right.
Well, Mark, we are nearing the end of the episode, and each episode has some wrap-up questions that we ask each and every guest. And the first of the wrap-up questions is, in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be a great addition or feature to the show. So let me ask, who would be a phenomenal guest or feature to this show? There's two catches. The first catch is that I cannot have had interviewed them already. which means that you may have to run a couple guesses. The second catch is you have to confidently be able to put us in contact. If you cannot, then don't recommend them.
Boy, that's tough. And I should have thought about this before because I knew you were going to ask this question. There's a couple of guys who have been friends, some for years, some not. Eric DeCamps, I think, would be a great guest.
That's a great one. That would
be
great
great guest to have. And a guy named Will Fern. Will is from North Jersey. He is super good, close up and stand up, funny as can be, high energy. He, as he says, he brings the fun.
Well, you nailed it.
Yeah, I've booked Will several times for gigs for my own company. And he's just great. He's
fantastic.
Just so much fun. So
those are great.
Those are two guys that I would heartily recommend.
Two great names. The next one is a question about modern magic. And we were talking about it a little bit, but what's one thing in the world of magic right now that you like that's going on? And what's one thing in the world of magic right now you don't like?
I like magicians doing long form, meaning shows like Paul Gertner, Eric DeCamps, obviously Derek Delgadio, but he is in a thoroughly different category. That's not the same. But there are magicians doing one-man shows in a whole lot of different venues now. And I think that's phenomenal because it gives you the opportunity to learn about them, to explore a lot of things within a show that makes it a much better experience for the audiences and better respect for magic.
And what's something you don't like about magic?
Again, I think again it goes to the the whole thing about the internet and just not properly respecting magic and its creators. There's lots and lots of names I can mention of people whose work is out there that shouldn't be. Until we can get a handle on that and change magicians' attitude toward it, I think it's going to be detrimental. And one of the biggest problems is that you're going to get creators not willing to share because they're just going to get ripped off.
Yeah, it's going to encourage more secret keeping, which is
Correct.
Kind of the opposite.
It'll be like it used to be back in the 30s and 40s.
The next thing is the take-home point. We've been talking about lots of different things in magic for over an hour now. We've touched on a ton of different topics, and people listen to this podcast doing a lot of things, washing their dishes, walking their dog, washing their dog, I don't know. But if they're going to think back to this episode and remember one key thing that will help them for weeks, years, months, what thing did we talk about that you think is like the most important, the big take-home point for people?
I think it's a combination of research, of being a little more studious about your magic. Don't depend on being spoon-fed magic. You need to begin to research material. Pick out a trick that you think could fit you and start researching it. Where did it come from? Who's done it before? And what would make it good for you? How does that become a good trick for you to do? So, I would say research and diligence. If you start on something, carry through with it. Don't get sidetracked.
For me, the big highlight was this idea of being interested, like to build this community, to be as connected. If I want to grow up to become Mark Desouza, the answer is to be interested, not to say, oh, I'm so excited to meet you, but to say, let's talk about this thing. Finally, you're here. I've been dying to talk to you about this thing. That's how you build the connections. And that term that I said earlier that I think I never said it in that way before, but I think it really clicks is, we spend time with magicians who respect magic in the same way that we do, and I think that's a big like aha for if you want to connect with other magicians, think about how they are thinking about their magic, what level they respected it, and try to match that level of respect.
Absolutely.
The last is plugs. Where can people find you? Where can they find your lectures, your books, your lecture note? Where can people find any of that stuff?
Well, I did a couple of videos back in the early 80s that Mayor Yedid, I think, still sells on his My Magic.
You had like twice as much hair back then.
And it was darker.
It was darker.
Darker. And at least one of those videos, well, I think both of those videos, there was no beard. I was
and those were, you did like a multiple, like 4 discs or something. That wasn't with Mayor.
Well, that was no, that's the L&L set that I did. That I filmed back in 2000 or 2001. And that was a great experience. And it's a great package because each disc deals with a different subject matter. So one whole disc is on, stand-up manipulative type magic. And then another disc is on storytelling magic and script-based stuff. Another disc is on close-up magic. And the last disc is my history show, which you actually see me do. And I teach, the specifics of a number of classic pieces that are in it. And that may be one of the most valuable, because I've had at least 3 pros tell me they use that to build a show that they took on cruise ships.
Well, you just packed
as an extra
that
thing.
DVD series. You just filled it with everything.
Yeah, it was when I got out there, Lewis, may his soul rest in peace. Lewis said, "You win the prize." I said, "What?" He says, "You brought more crap to this shoot than any other magician ever had." I shipped stuff out ahead of time and still carried stuff with me, but it's a great package. And then I did a 4.5-hour Penguin Live lecture just on stand-up magic. No close-up at all. It's just a stand-up show, a 45-minute stand-up show that I performed. I taught all the pieces, plus I taught extra pieces, and then I talked about some manip stuff and some contests stuff.
And your book, where can be, or is that available now?
The book that Cameron published, that David Acker was the author of, is out of print, as is Chain Gang. However,
man, is that book good?
Thank you. I am just releasing that as an ebook. Both that and Chain Gang. And if your listeners contact me via email, I will make them a very, very, very special deal. So
what's the email address?
The email is, and this is really tough, FKAPS at AOL.com.
I guess he didn't have an email, so you stole it, eh? He had a phone number, but you took his email.
The early days of AOL, there were a whole bunch of us that took dead magician names.
Well, they ain't gonna take it, so I want it.
Yep.
They ain't gonna take it.
Exactly. And I get occasional emails to Fred Caps.
So sorry, I know we lost it in the list, but where can people go on Myriad's site, My Magic, Vanishing Ink?
Their site, right now, L&L was sold to Murphy's, and so those videos are available on Murphy's site or through your favorite dealer. The Penguin Live Lecture is available from Penguin on their site, and if they want the book and video, they can contact me. I've got some lecture notes and stuff too that in the pandemic I haven't gone out and lectured much, but I've done a bunch of online lectures, so those are out there too. So contact me. I am very approachable, happy to answer any email that I get, and hook you if you want that, or just talk if you want to do that.
Well, Mark, you're a true gem in the world of magic. You do a lot for magic, and we're very grateful for it. This was a phenomenal episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. As always, if this was cool or interesting or smart, then you should tell someone about it. And you can either tell them like you tell a friend, or you can share it on the internet, on social, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Tinder, wherever. It's a fun way to tell people that you are also smart. Anyways, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next Thursday. Peace.